Hi. In this video, I'd like to talk about some of the problems that young men are facing these days. In the course of my own ministry in the last 6 years or so, there have been a number of young men, quite a lot of young men who have come to my parish, and they're driven by a need, and they're all looking for something. And so I began to notice the pattern when they first began coming, like I say, about 5 or 6 years ago. But I've been accumulating some of the information that they've been telling me, and so I'm trying to sketch out a pattern here of first of all, what are young men really suffering from? Are there some secondary causes to their pain? And indeed there are. Third, I'd like to look at sort of the popular images of masculinity that they're surrounded with in the popular culture. And then lastly, speak directly to the kind of symptoms that their problems are causing in their lives. So this whole episode is going to be just a little bit of a downer because it's all going to be about problems and not about solutions. We'll get to solutions in subsequent videos, I promise you. But I really want to understand the problems well first so that any solutions or help that I offer afterwards can actually be addressing the problems that as they present themselves. So in that respect, I'm really interested in your comments to this video. If you'd please leave them down below. Let me know if what I'm seeing resonates with your experience, or if I'm way off base with something, if there's something that I've left out, that there's something missing, or if you're not a young man, but you see the kind of behaviors or see the kind of issues that they're suffering, let me know if it's confirming your observations as well. So I really appreciate your help with this one. So to begin with, what's wrong with young men? And what is the presenting problem that they have? I've encountered everything from a vague sense of young men wanting more to feeling vaguely dissatisfied with their lives, all the way up to therapy level problems, where I've really had to refer people for professional help. What it largely boils down to, if I try to find a few words to put it into, largely they can't get their shit together. They lack motivation. They're not quite sure what to do with their lives. Now, I don't think in all cases it's necessarily a failure to launch, to get out of the house and to get on their own. In some cases, that is true. This is why we have that very common meme, of the fat, lazy guy laying in his parents' basement, covered in Cheetos dust and crusty tissues, playing video games all the time. I mean, the reason that it's kind of a meme is because it cuts a little too close to reality for some guys. And I have encountered a few of those, or guys who are trying to do well and for some reason are still kind of stuck in some aspect of their lives. They either have no job, or they've got a dead-end job, or they can't make enough money to move out of their parents' house or whatnot, and they feel just sort of stuck there. But I mean, even just take the image of it, laying in a basement, a dark, enclosed space that's safe, that's comfortable, where all of your needs are taken care of and met. Kind of sounds like a womb, doesn't it? So there's a real need for young men who are stuck in situations like that to get loose and to get away. We used to call it cutting the apron strings and getting out from under mama's thumb. And I think for a lot of young men, if they can find the means and the resources to get away and to get out on their own, even if it's with a couple of roommates, it would be better for them psychologically than to spend, up to 3 decades in their parents' house. Sometimes guys really don't know what to do. I was told this story. I was at a men's conference up in Maine last month, and another man was telling me he was an entrepreneur. He had his own business, and he just hired a 25-year-old man to come and work for him. So that had the interview, he offered him the job was accepted, and the owner handed him, all of the usual paperwork that we have to fill out when we start a new job, the W-2 form, health insurance applications, personal information sheets, all of that kind of stuff. And the young man came back the next day, and he had managed to fill in his name. None of the other forms had any other information on them, and he confessed he had no idea what to do with any of these things. And then here's the kicker, here's the line. He said to the entrepreneur, "I just started adulting a year ago." I thought to myself, my God, first, I've never heard the phrase to start adulting, but to be 25 years old and not to know how to do basic things that the world requires you to do, man, the guy's been kind of sheltered, or he's not taken much responsibility for his own life. Granted, we all start somewhere, but you'd hope that maybe you got this stuff figured out when when you were 16 and went to work for Burger King for the first time, or something like that. But it was just an astonishing revelation, that there are men in their mid-20s who really don't know how to handle life and some of the basic things that most adults know how to do because he hadn't started adulting yet. And if there's anything, any piece of advice that you can take away from this video, guys, grow up as quickly as you can. Start adulting yesterday. And if you don't know how, get the help you need. Get some training, ask somebody else, but the more personal responsibility you can take for your own life, the better off you're going to be. Okay, so young men, they sort of lack motivation. They can't get their shit together. Sometimes they don't really know what to do in the big real world out there. Very often they kind of do know what to do, but they need to kind of man up. They don't know how to do it. Somehow everything is harder than they thought it would be, or it takes longer than they thought it should, or somehow the juice isn't quite worth the squeeze, and so they want to give up. And it's, as those of us who are a little older know, very often anything worthwhile is going to take twice as long, it's going to cost twice as much, and it's going to be twice as hard as we thought it was going to be. That's just the reality, and until you learn exactly how hard some things are, you're not really living well or living in reality. And so to figure that out and to know what's expected of us is a fundamental part of young men's maturation and growing up. For a lot of guys, as I say, it's not a matter of information. They know what they need to do. They just can't get themselves to do it. If it were all just information, hell, there is so much information online now, that if it were just information, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs, right? And it's not the case. We have the information, but we don't do anything with it. And that seems to be the case with a lot of the young men that I encounter. A lot of them come, especially to the church, because they're looking for structure and for stability. And I get it. Life has been a little chaotic up to this point, especially if they're newly out on their own. They're not quite sure how to navigate the rest of the world. It can be a scary place. They don't feel that they have all the tools they need in order successfully to get on in the world. And so looking for something or someone that can provide some structure in the midst of all of this chaos is very important to them. And, for those of you who don't know, I am an Orthodox priest, and the Orthodox Church has lots of structure. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's attractive, particularly to young men in this stage of their lives. So they're looking for structure, they're looking for stability, they want a place where they know they can stand firmly and be okay. So our church has been able to provide that for them. But it gives them a little basis, an oasis or a place to stand so that they can begin to get the rest of their lives put in order as well. And so that's a beautiful thing that I've been able to see happen with a number of the young men who have come to our church. Okay. Sometimes they come with frustration that they can't really formulate a positive vision for their own lives. And I get that. I don't know what I want to do. Well, I studied this in college. Well, I changed majors 5 times. I finally got a degree in this, but I don't know that I really want to do that for the rest of my life, or I can't find a job in my chosen field or whatnot. And they're just not quite sure what they want to do. They're not sure what their passions are either. If you say to them, follow your bliss or follow your passion, which I don't think is necessarily the best advice, but they're not even sure what they're passionate about. It's like they don't have much experience of the world in order to say, I really enjoy that, or I would love to go and spend some time doing that. They just don't have that kind of stuff. And very often part of the reason that they can't formulate a positive vision for what they want to do in life and where they want to go or where they'd like to see themselves in 10 years' time is because very often they're still running away from their pain. And young men live with a lot of pain. They live with a lot of chaos. They live with a lot of uncertainty. And for those who are working with younger men, younger people in general, I would say, because I think young women, suffer from this in the same way. But they're very often running away from pain and aren't sure what to do with it, or how to deal with it in a healthy and constructive way. So that's simply out there. They look for meaning, they're looking for truth, they're looking for certainty, absolutely. And fundamentally, I think, though, that, this is not, this sort of yearning or this desire for something more, I don't think is a pathology. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think maybe they've come to a point in their life where they really do realize there's got to be more. Life has to mean something more than what I've experienced so far. And this is, in fact, I think, hardwired into us. My favorite line from St. Augustine of Hippo is found in the first paragraph of his book, The Confessions. And the first paragraph is a prayer addressed to God. And while he's talking to God, Augustine says, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." And I think St. Augustine hits on something fundamental here. All of us have restless hearts. All of us have a kind of longing or a yearning for something bigger and better than ourselves. I think we're all looking for something transcendent to believe in, to ground ourselves in. And so, when I see young people, or really anybody, but it seems to be mostly young people I'm encountering, when they come to me with this sense of unease that life isn't enough, that they're just not satisfied with this itch that they can't completely scratch and all, I see it for what it is, that ultimately I think it's a desire for God, that there is nothing in this world that's ever going to satisfy us completely, and that we need to kind of recognize that there is at least something transcendent, something bigger than ourselves, that we need to believe in, that we need to give ourselves to, and that ultimately will give our lives meaning, and in which we can ultimately find a kind of peace. So, that's I think that's one of the more positive spins that I can put on sort of the agitation and all that I'm finding in young people. And in some cases, I guess, lastly, a lot of the young men have come to me saying that, that they had lacked support or somehow been wounded by one or other of their parents. We often forget, even for young people in their late 20s and even into their early 30s, their parents are still one of the largest and most significant influences on their lives. And so, if mom was a single mom, or if dad wasn't around enough, or there wasn't enough emotional support, or, dad wanted you to play football and you really wanted to play violin, or whatever it may happen to be. Believe me, all parents fail to some degree or another. As the father of two sons, I bear my own burden of guilt for ways I could have raised them better myself. But we all do carry sort of these wounds or these resentments toward our parents and all. And so young people very often come looking for some kind of affirmation that they really are okay. That the fact that they just want to code all day is maybe all right, even though, mom or dad wanted them to be an accountant, or anything like that. Or very often they come looking for some kind of permission. They're looking for some adult to give them permission to live their own lives, to say, yeah, it's really okay, if you want to go and study music, whatever it may be. So these are some of the things that I'm finding in the young men that are coming to the church, some of the problems that they're presenting me with, and some of the things they tell me that they're kind of suffering from. I have said this several times to young men, and they all seem to find that it cuts a little too close to the bone. I will say to them, tell me this, does this resonate? So you're telling me that 15 years of smoking weed, playing video games, and jerking off to porn are not the best preparation for life? And they said, yeah, really it was not. But that's kind of, endemic in young men's experience these days, and it's really not the best preparation for life. And so what I think a lot of older men need to do, and by older men, I'm not talking about just guys like me that's over 50 or over 60. I mean, someone who's got both feet on the ground, who's already learned how to adult, who's already begun his own path in the world, who's maybe only a year or two older than some of these guys that we encounter. You can be a really positive influence in their life. You can be a blessing. You're the one who can say, yeah, you want to go study that? Go study that. Or sort of give that permission or affirmation, just a word of affirmation and approval. Man, you really do that well. A lot of younger people are desperate for approval, for affirmation, to know that they're actually okay, that they're worth something, that they're valuable as a person. And they're just desperate for that kind of validation. That's why they go seeking it on social media and so many other places. But if there is a real person in their life who can provide some of that, it's an incredible blessing. So I just throw that in as, as a little extra. That's something you can do for the young people in your life as you encounter them. Okay, that's the first issue. Are there secondary or contributing problems to what young people are experiencing, and that's helping to cause their pain, or keeping them from fully launching, or feeling, like they know what they're doing and they've got both feet on the ground and are ready to face adult life? And I think that there have been a number of things. Yeah, just the general state of the world nowadays has everybody anxious. Ever since about 2016, with the last presidential election, the one in which Trump was elected, that election cycle really ramped up everybody's anxiety. I saw it personally in the church. When people came to confession, I noticed a strong uptick in behaviors that were all basically self-medication. And I realized that everybody was absolutely stressed out. If it wasn't mudslinging in the presidential election, then subsequently it was COVID, or it was Black Lives Matter, or it's the war in Ukraine, or it's something else. Oh, murder hornets, I think, were a thing for a little while there. It's like you couldn't catch your breath for the next, biblical-sized catastrophe that was about to fall upon us, and everybody was stressed out to the max. So everybody was then, the amount of drinking went up, the amount of smoking weed went up, playing video games, for the younger guys, great increase, in porn usage and masturbation among the young men, fights, just between people because the stress levels were so high. That's kind of been with us. It wasn't so bad prior to 2016. And so just in about 8-9 years, it's gotten really ramped up, which is why I encourage everybody as much as possible, digital fast, get off of social media, turn off the news. The world will go on pretty much on its own without you watching it and paying attention to it 24/7. And it will do wonders for your mental health if you're not constantly paying attention to that stuff. Okay? So just the whole world is an anxious place, and failure to provide good self-care, and establish good boundaries around yourself and the stuff you let in your eyes and in your ears and let into your homes, is an important step that too many people are not taking. And they just get swept up into the latest thing and get carried along with it, and then wonder why their stomach hurts, or they can't sleep, or they can't concentrate on their job anymore, and they've got all the signs of stress and burnout. Okay, we can take better care of ourselves. In addition, the world is kind of materialist in its perspective and the way it presents itself. So if the material world is all that's there, if there's nothing transcendent, if there's no meaning beyond what I give it, a lot of people have been raised that way, and they just don't find it an adequate explanation for the fullness of life. It doesn't explain love. It doesn't explain affection. It doesn't explain fear. It doesn't ultimately satisfy. Like I was saying earlier, there is a longing, an existential longing in each of us that is for something transcendent and more meaningful. And simple materialist explanations of the world just are not adequate to that. And people realize it. And so they begin to question everything. Well, if that's not true, maybe everything else I've been taught is not true. And this is part of what spurs people on a spiritual search, on a spiritual journey. But some people, it just makes bitter and cynical. Well, if there is no meaning, then screw it all. What do I need to go looking for? I'm just going to get my immediate gratification wherever I can find it, because that's all life is about. So I'll get mine, and to hell with you and yours. You get yours if you want to, but I'm taking care of myself. I see a lot of that attitude. For some young men also, a little too much Nietzsche in their reading in high school. or college, or just enough Nietzsche with not much understanding. So what I've kind of discovered is, these guys, they're all, yeah, God is dead and Christianity is a slave religion, and they'll throw in a little Dostoevsky, if God is dead, then everything is possible. So I can do what I damn well please and I don't have to feel guilty about anything, and I can be a selfish bastard and that's all okay. It's really not the healthiest philosophy. And when you push them a little further, they all secretly believe that they are Übermenschen, supermen, and that, come the zombie apocalypse or whatever it is that's supposed to happen, they're going to be the guys who are going to come out on top, and they're the ones who are going to get all the hot chicks too. And it's delusional at worst, and it's not helpful at best. But you get these guys who, and they end up as just kind of burnt out souls without much hope, very black pilled, very nihilistic and negative in their attitudes. And they're in a lot of pain. I don't say it to be critical. I appreciate the pain that these guys are suffering. But for those guys, a lot of them, they really have to hit rock bottom before they're able to bounce out of it. And when they realize this is a real dead end way to live and to think, there's not a whole lot that can be done for them. They seem resistant to at least they've been resistant to a lot of the arguments that I've been able to put forward. But eventually, when the pain gets bad enough, they'll be willing to look for an alternative. And, we can be there to help them, when they're ready to get through that. In addition to that, COVID. Yeah, COVID brought a lot of people face to face with their own mortality when they saw, perhaps an elderly loved one die from the disease, maybe the first time they'd encountered death, or the real fear early on in the COVID crisis when we really didn't know how infectious this thing was or how horrible it might be for people. There was a lot of fear, and a lot of people who thought, wow, wait, I'm only 24 and I could die from this? And it really kind of rocked their world. And kind of got them a little more interested in more ultimate questions and started really to examine their own lives. So that's one of the results of the COVID lockdown. They want to do, and it spurred a lot of people. I've heard a lot of young people say this. It kind of spurred them on to want to do something more significant with their lives. Yeah, I got a good job, but I kind of live in a cubicle all day and, stare at a computer screen, and I just feel like I need to do more, or I want to do more. And a lot of it was from the isolation during COVID that we really lost, touch with other human beings, and the isolation began to play on everybody's mind. So, simply to go back and sit all by yourself in a cubicle and do your own little thing kind of lost a lot of its appeal when isolation was forced upon us for weeks or months. So that's also a contributing cause that we have there. Another one is that I remember some article I read a while back. It said people are just tired of living in Mordor. They're tired of fighting. They're tired of seeing nothing but violence and hatred and anger on television. They're tired of working in ugly buildings with ugly furniture or doing work that they don't see the ultimate good. How is this helping people? All it's doing is making my boss rich. The music is ugly. The clothes are ugly. People's attitudes are ugly. And they're just tired of living in an ugly world. And I get it. As Dostoevsky says, beauty will save the world. But, a lot of times nowadays, beauty gets mocked. Goodness gets ridiculed. A lot of contemporary art doesn't create anything new. All it does is deform and distort and make ugly something that was formerly beautiful. And they enjoy doing this to stuff and twisting it around. And it ends up with a very ugly, cynical, bitter world. And people, I think, are just tired of that. Lord knows I am, to go into sort of the sterile environments of typical big box stores or the shopping mall with all of the absolutely curated offerings that are given to me to consume, that this is what I'm supposed to like because this is what somebody else told me to like. Even if it's ugly, even if it's meaningless, even if it doesn't really fit into my life, and I find myself, wait, why do I even want that stuff? And it's all because this is what we've been given, and it's ultimately thin gruel, and it doesn't satisfy at all. So I think those are a number of the kind of secondary things that have contributed to young men's issues nowadays. Okay? In addition to that, sort of the third thing that I wanted to talk about in this video, the role models that they see around themselves. They're surrounded, all of the shadow forms of masculinity is what's presented on television, culture, social media, wherever you look. Rarely do we find an image of mature, wholesome, generative, integrated masculinity. They're all shadow forms of it. What do I mean? We've all seen it. The buffoon dad in sitcoms and in popular media. Of course, the buffoon dad who, can't find his ass with both hands is always married to a strong, independent, competent wife, who has everything together and comes to save the day and is able to accomplish everything despite the bumbling of her idiot husband. That's a very common trope and has been around for at least 30 or 40 years. Homer Simpson, is one of the clear paradigms for that one. Also, the nice guy. We're always told to be nice guys, but the nice guy never gets what he wants. So that ultimately looks like a dead end for a lot of young guys. I tried being nice. I tried doing everything that was expected of me, everything that I was supposed to do. I did all of that, and where did it get me? Nowhere. So being a nice guy doesn't work. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we got kind of the macho stud, the bad boy, who may occasionally get the girls or whatnot, but who we know, it doesn't take much to scrape away the surface and you find that he really is a poser, he's insincere, or he's fundamentally scared underneath. So he puts up this, this facade of bluster or machismo in order to keep everybody else away because he's hurting so damn bad on the inside. Then, in more recent times, the phrase toxic masculinity, or the all men are rapists of Me Too feminism. So men begin to be even more careful about interacting with women, guarding themselves even more, self-censoring the kinds of things they say, particularly at work or in public places, and they just kind of shut down socially as a result of it. Also in popular media, especially those of us who are white men, are of course portrayed as the cause of every problem, woe, and ill in the world. And that comes right out of wokeism. So we see all of this. And, just to throw in for good measure, what's been going on for at least as long as I've been alive, and that is the constant ridicule of Christ and his gospel and his church, so that anything Christian becomes looked at as, as foolishness or idiocy or ignorance or oppression or something else, rather than the truth of what it really is. So all of these kind of images that are given to us of men in popular culture, none of them are appealing. Who the hell wants to look or act like any of that? And so young guys, if that's what it means to be a man, to hell with it. Why do I even want to try? Why do we even bother? And so a lot of guys will withdraw, they'll self-medicate, they'll just give up and throw in the towel. And again, they're inclined to want to stay there until the pain of existence gets to be too much, and then that'll eventually shove them back into action again. But I've known a lot of guys who have just kind of given up on saying they just don't feel like a real man. They're not quite sure how to get in touch with their masculinity. They don't know how to access it. They're not sure it's a good thing, even if they do. And they're really confused about that. And it's because they've been soaked and saturated in a culture that shows them only toxic, immature, and hurtful images of men and masculinity. So finally, what are the symptoms that a lot of the young guys are coming with? A lot of the symptoms that they have are basically exercises in self-medication and addictive behaviors. Okay, so that includes things like pornography, video games, sports, even exercise. And if you know me, I work out 6 days a week, but even exercise can become a form of escape, ism. Sports, workaholism, pot, alcohol, anything that you use to take away the pain of reality and the pain of living can become addictive. Even good things. I personally don't have any problem with guys who like to watch the football game on the weekend. Okay, but if you're watching 2 or 3 football games, or you're constantly on the couch, watching games all weekend so that you don't have to interact with your wife or with your kids, then it becomes a problem. You see, and that's what we're looking for, is anything we use to avoid life, to avoid our problems, to numb our pain, or to distract us from the real issues we need to be dealing with. Those are the kind of problems that we're talking about, and I see it endemic pretty much in all men, but it's also present in young men as well. There is among young men a lot of cynicism. This is where you get a lot of the irony that young men sort of delight in, that everything they just make an ironic comment about everything. It's a sign of a burnt out soul. They come really, really close to hopelessness and despair, and they really just want to check out and numb their pain, which again, I understand, but to be in such a position is so very sad. Rates of depression and even suicide among young men have been climbing for years. It's one of the major causes of death among young men. They just can't take it anymore. They're tired of hurting. They're tired of being alone. And, suicide actually looks like a better option than hurting for another day, which is the ultimate cop-out, but also the ultimate rejection, of your very life. And it's one of the saddest things that I encounter now and again. Boredom. Young guys are incredibly bored with life. Sometimes they get caught up in consumerism, as I said before, looking for those curated commercial solutions to everything that ails them, anything to dull down or drown out their existential angst and all. Believe me, if someone's trying to sell you something, they're in it for themselves, not really for your help. That includes a lot of self-help stuff or self-improvement information that you find on social media. I know the irony of me saying that here, but it's true. You got to be careful of your sources. Is the information here genuinely to help you, or is it just to drum up some business for the person who's presenting the information? All right. A lot of young men will LARP, live action role play, if you don't know what LARPing is. Okay. And so we'll say, oh, well, I need to be a man, so let me find some of the trappings or, something that looks like sort of performative masculinity, and I'll go and do that and then see how that makes me feel. So we try to act like men so that we feel like men. And, it doesn't always work. In point of fact, sort of working backwards from cause to effect, from effect backwards to cause. If I act like a man, then I will be a man. Working backwards from effect to cause is actually one of the definitions of magic. So I think a lot of guys are trying magically to enhance their own sense of masculinity by LARPing the kinds of things that they think mature or adult or admirable men do. And if I do that, then I will feel like a real man myself. I'm not sure that entirely works. To be perfectly honest, I'm a little ambivalent about that, because there really is a benefit in faking it till fake it till you make it. So if there's a particular quality that you're really looking to embody in your own life and say, oh, that guy's got what I want, let me act like him, and maybe I can get to where he is. I think there's some real benefit in that. But sometimes just LARPing and thinking that, oh, what was that? What was that trend we had a while back? I forget what was it called? Lumbersexuals or something like that, where you had all of these guys who are wearing like heavy work boots and jeans and red flannel shirts and long beards, looking like lumberjacks, but they were going off to their little cubicle job, in the corporate office, and all that. Somehow by wearing this particular kind of clothing, it connoted a more masculine image than, the guy living in the cube farm down at HQ. I don't know that it really worked, and a lot of guys got a lot of ridicule for that. Maybe rightly, maybe wrongly. Again, I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but again, it's this sort of grasping at externals in order to appear more manly than perhaps we really are, rather than doing the deep work to transform our own hearts and our own minds so that we can genuinely be the kind of man that we want to be, so that we can then do the kind of manly things that we want to do so that we can then have the kind of life that we ultimately want to have. Okay. And lastly, one of the reasons a lot of guys are really kind of messed up and aren't succeeding real well in their early 20s or mid 20s and all, is kind of because they just do what they want to do, which kind of seems paradoxical. But they're not doing the kinds of things that objectively improve their lives. In other words, they're not doing the grunt work. They're not doing the hard work that they need to do in order genuinely to improve or to get better. They're doing the stuff they enjoy. So they're doing the fun stuff. Well, it ain't always fun, and sometimes we have to grunt and sometimes we have to grind a long time in order to get what we really want, you know? And so guys are just not putting in the work that they need to in order to get ahead. And then they're surprised when the work turns out to be harder than they think it is, or they're just not prepared for the level of intensity or the duration, how long they have to keep at this before they begin to see some fruit of it. So those are some of the things that I see, some of the symptoms: self-medicating and addictive behaviors, cynicism and irony, hopelessness and despair, a willingness to check out, depression, suicidal ideations, boredom, sometimes consumerism, LARPing certain aspects of masculinity, and then just kind of doing what they want when they really know in their heart of hearts that they need to be doing this more serious work over here, but they're too busy doing the stuff that they enjoy ever really to make progress. So that's some stuff that, like I said, this episode is a little bit of a downer because we've talked about, what are the presenting problems that young men have, some of the secondary causes that are affecting young men, the sort of negative stereotypes and images that we see in culture, and some of the symptoms that I see immediately presented when they come to me looking for help. So it's a little bit of a downer, but as I said at the beginning, I want to get a good grasp of the problems that young men are facing so that when I try to work with them or try to work out something that will help them to make progress in their lives, I'm addressing the actual issues that they're facing and not something I think they're facing. And I'm not offering them what I think they need, but rather what they genuinely do need. So again, if you would be so kind, if I've struck a nerve, if I've described your condition, I'd really like to hear about it in the comments below. If I'm completely off base and your experience is very different, I'd like to hear about that too. But again, my purpose here is to be of service to you, to help you to become the best man that you can be and to see you flourish in life. So help me to do that the best that I can. And continue to watch. For the subsequent episodes, we will be talking about more positive things, how we can help correct and overcome some of these issues that these young men are facing today, some of the things that perhaps you are dealing with yourself. So watch for future episodes, and I'll get stuff up to you and out to you as quickly as I can. Much obliged for your attention. Thank you too much.